Hi, welcome back to Anxiety Master. In the last video, we looked at a method for how we can respond to strong and overwhelming emotional experiences. Now this is important because, well, when we feel emotional, this small part of our brain, the amygdala, forces us into all or nothing, black and white thinking. In other words, we tend to make quick assumptions and harsh judgments about other people and the situations that we're in. But let's not get too down on black and white thinking. I mean, it does have some use cases. So for instance, in short-term and dangerous situations, the ultimate black and white thought is, should I run or should I stay and fight? Now, of course, in moments like this, we don't want to be thinking too much. In other words, we need a quick reaction to a situation, and the different shades of grey at that moment don't really count for too much. However, there are a range of different types of black and white thinking that when they occur on a daily basis can really get in our way. In other words, they tend to be a response to stress, but they also induce stress and keep it going as well. So before we look at a plan for how we can get under the hood with some of these black and white thinking styles in order to put them back in their place, let's take a look at how they tend to emerge in everyday life and, well, see if you recognise any of these for yourself. Let's start with all-encompassing. This is making sweeping assumptions. Something can go wrong, you can guarantee it will. Only an idiot would think like that. Then there's self-focusing, believing that there's personal significance behind random events. These stupid traffic lights want me to get into trouble at work. Look at that annoying grin, blazing through life and straight into my lane. Jumping to conclusions, reaching a judgment on the basis of one or often more insignificant facts or events. My wife's late from work, she's having an affair. Anxiety runs in my family, of course I'll always suffer from it. Blaming, here we are looking for someone or something to carry the can, often ourselves, when things go wrong. It's all my fault that nobody had a good evening. I should have just stayed home. No wonder everything's going wrong in the world. It all comes down to social media. Exaggerating feelings or emotional reasoning. We interpret sensations and emotions as far more damaging in meaning than they are. I only get this feeling when something terrible has happened. Anxiety making the heart pump a bit? Call an ambulance, it's a heart attack, definitely. Then there's taking a position. This is being unwilling to accept another viewpoint or potential for compromise. You should never aim to please other people. You should always aim to please other people. If you can't do it perfectly, you shouldn't do it. Catastrophizing, assuming that the outcome of an event will be disastrous. If I don't get this job, my career is over. If I'm late for the meeting, I'm going to die. Having to be perfect, imposing impossible or limiting expectations on yourself. I only got 9 out of 10. How could I be so stupid to make a mistake? If I don't lose weight in time for the holiday, I'll look disgusting. Obfuscating. This is reaching for elaborate mental explanations for events that are more simply explained. I failed because I was afraid of success. Really? She hasn't answered my message because she likes it when I'm right on edge. Okay. And there's putting oneself down. Here you're belittling and minimizing self-care and respect. Who'd ever want someone with a face like this? I only won because nobody else was trying. Are any bells ringing? These filters operate... Did you recognise at least one of those for yourself, or maybe 5? For me, I recognise a handful. In fact, I think probably the one that I fall back into most of the time is catastrophising, using always and never, especially when I feel tired at the end of a long day. So let's now start trying to put our ducks back in a row and see what we can do to really get under the hood with some of these thoughts and to put them back in line. Okay, so the first step we want to take when it comes to combating negative self-talk is really to claim that thought. So it's often the case that when we have negative thoughts, we have all of this content running through our mind. We're feeding this generator of negative content, but we don't actually remember to question it. We just accept it. We accept it as the truth. But what we want to do is we want to start by claiming that thought, which is really to become aware of when you resort to black and white thinking. So is it in certain situations? Is it with certain people? To ask yourself as well, what are the triggers? So as I said, for me, a trigger for catastrophizing is often when I feel tired. It may also be when you feel hungry, or when you feel thirsty, or when you feel under pressure, or when you feel emotional upset, for instance. And so once we start to understand when those patterns emerge for us and what the triggers might be, then we can start to become more mindful of how these states affect our thought patterns. So the very first step is to claim the thought. And then from here, we want to call it out. So by calling it out, we're going to recognise that black and white thinking narrows our perspective. It really means that when we fall into black and white thinking, we're forgetting all the shades of grey, all the shades of context in everyday situations. So by being forced into a polarised way of thinking and seeing things, well, we know by design that this probably isn't really the case. It's a very biased way of perceiving the world. So, for instance, if we notice that we're falling into always or never, we might realise, I can realise that this is the result of emotional distress or tiredness or hunger or some other stressor that I'm facing at the moment. And then we want to identify these limiting judgments or assumptions before they escalate. Because the thing is, once they start seeping in, like that radio station inside, that voice that we're listening to, we can find ourselves getting invested in the way that we're thinking about things. Have you ever had an experience where you've started getting angry about a situation? And the more you think about it, the angrier you get. But the anger then becomes the justification for increasing anger. And in that moment, it can feel quite gratifying, but ultimately afterwards, it kind of always feels like an empty experience. So we always want to be making sure that we identify these limiting judgments or assumptions before they escalate. And then the next step is to check the why. Now, this is probably one of the most difficult steps for many of us because it kind of sounds a little bit counterintuitive. Why would we be invested in something which ultimately causes us distress? Well, there are various different reasons for this, but let's say, for instance, if we're feeling frustrated or feeling misunderstood, or we want to find an excuse for something, or maybe we're feeling angry and we just want to let off steam, then we can find ourselves getting really invested in certain ways of thinking because in a way what they do is they validate our emotional experience. But as I said, whilst that might feel like a good thing in the moment, longer term it's never good because essentially what's going to happen is if we're feeding ourselves a lot of this negative content, that's going to come out in our behaviour, that will come out in our interactions with other people, and invariably that's going to lead to conflict, which is always going to end up manifesting in additional stress. So we want to check the why and to be aware whether there are any perceived benefits in pursuing kind of black and white stressed ways of thinking. So for instance, black and white thinking often offers easy explanations, but of course this can harm relationships. This can limit our personal growth if we find excuses for maybe not putting ourselves forward or giving ourselves new opportunities. So we dig deeper and always uncover the underlying motivation that might be fueling some of these black and white thoughts. It's quite a tricky step, but it's a really, really crucial one. And then the next step is to challenge. This is really to challenge the thought's accuracy or usefulness. So, for instance, how sure are you that the thought that you're having is true? And maybe this is a really useful thing that you can do here is to try and consider 3 alternatives. If you were to look at the situation from an outside perspective, might you see something slightly differently? It's often the case that something can feel real, but that doesn't make it true. So essentially what we're trying to do here is basically bring in different perspectives, different ways of interpreting or perceiving a situation. Within itself, this is very, very calming because what it does is it forces you to step back into your objective self. So you're not always on the receiving end of this emotional experience through the filter of your black and white thinking. But it puts you back into your observing self where you can see things a little bit more objectively and from a distance. This is very, very calming. And so once we've challenged the thought and we've assessed its validity, and maybe we've looked for some alternative explanations or interpretations for the situation at hand, then we move to choosing a new response. And this is really a step of self-compassion, and we can ask ourselves 3 questions when it comes to the way that we're interpreting the situation. We can ask ourselves, well, is my story truthful? So for instance, if I know that I'm feeling tired or frustrated or angry or upset, there's a chance that that's having an influence upon the way that I'm perceiving this situation and the kind of thoughts that I'm having about it. And then the next step is to ask myself, well, is the story I'm telling myself or are the thoughts I'm having kind? So let's say I've thought about putting myself forward for, I don't know, a role at college or maybe as a representative at work. And the first thing I think is, I could never do that. It will never work out. Everything will be far too difficult and it will always be too challenging for me to take it on. Well, is that really a kind thought? Not really. It's coming from a place of criticism and not really giving ourselves a chance to ever develop or grow. So if we find that the way that we're thinking about something isn't kind, either to ourselves or to other people, then we can be pretty sure that it's not really the right story or it's not the appropriate, helpful thought that we really need to be having. And then the last step is to ask ourselves whether the story that we're telling ourselves or the thoughts we're having give us the power to act. So if the way that we're perceiving things makes it difficult for us to make any kind of improvement or to develop or grow in some kind of way because everything is already so rigid, then it can't be the story that's worth us telling ourselves. One way we can think about this is, imagine a friend who's had a bad day and they're telling you about everything that's gone wrong and they're saying things to you like, no one likes me, it's always going to be like this, it's never going to change, everything's awful. And you'd say to them, hang on a second, that's not true. I know you to be a different person. I know that you are likeable and you are clever and intelligent and capable and all of the good stuff. Well, naturally, we need to be telling ourselves a similar kind of story. Otherwise, how can it be one that's going to help us move forward? So a quick recap. Number 1, to claim the thought. Number 2, to call out the thought. Number 3, to check the thought, ask ourselves, what's the investment? What's kind of getting me believing in this thought maybe more than I should? Then we want to challenge the thought. And then lastly, we want to choose a new perspective. And there are a couple of resources from this video which are completely free and they're available via the link in the description. I'm going to get that up as soon as I can. It's the 5 steps for choosing a new way to interpret situations and also the 15 stressed thinking styles, just a reminder for you to become aware of them. Okay, I hope you found that useful. Please let me know in the comments, then I know if I'm going in a good direction for you or not. And another video coming up very soon. Take care. See you then.